Hey everyone, it's Shram here. I thought it would be fun to start a new series on the channel where we have a chance to talk about, for better or for worse, things happening in the hobbies, whether it be gaming or Pokemon, just kind of in general, something to chat about casually. I figured there was no better place to start than kind of where I started with video games and how I approach collecting video games in general, and more specifically, how I approach them in 2025. I have a kind of specific set of rules that I go by that I was going to share with you guys that keeps me focused. It kind of keeps things a little easier, makes it easier for me to enjoy the hobby and not get so burnt out like I've seen so many people get burnt out through the years. You know, I've seen all kinds of sides of the video game hobby. I've been in and out of flea markets. I had my own store for a short time that I never quite opened back up, thanks to COVID mainly, but a few other variables in there as well. For the last couple years, I've kind of stuck to myself and been really casual about how I spend money on video games. I haven't really been going out to Goodwills and thrift stores, garage sales too much in the last couple years. I kind of just focus on what I want, and if I find it at a game store, I can trade for it, or maybe just spend the money on it if I think the value is there, right? My first rule is a pretty simple rule, and it's not for everybody because I understand that there are people who use the hobby for different things, right? Whether it be investment, experiences with their kids, or, to escape reality, all those kind of things that we hear from different people throughout the hobby. Your goals might not be the same as mine, so maybe these don't apply to you, but my rule, my first and foremost rule, is that I do not collect anything that I do not like to play or have some kind of significant value to. So I have to enjoy the game and want the game on my shelf because of playability before I jump to the collection side of it. There are games on my shelf from $1 sports games all the way up to things like Musha on Sega Genesis complete in box. So there is a very wide range of value on my shelf, but the commonality that all the games have is that they are catered towards me. They are my specific taste. This collection is not the most impressive collection to plenty of people. There are YouTubers out there, lots of people with far more impressive collections, lots of variety and walls from top to bottom just covered in games from all generations. Mine, though, is the best collection to me because it's specifically catered to me. I don't have to look through a bunch of games I don't enjoy to find what I do. I can close my eyes, reach on my shelf, and grab any game, and most likely I would be willing to play it because every game on my shelf is something that I find extremely enjoyable. So the goal kind of ties hand in hand, though, with my main playability goal is I want to play every game at least once. I want to give every game some time, whether it be 10 minutes, 20 minutes, to find out that I absolutely hate the game, like Time Commando or Animorphs on PS1, all the way up to beating the game multiple times, lots of playthroughs because it's one of my favorite games all time. That's really the goal in the playability aspect. And then for the collecting side, how I approach the actual physical collections is I narrow that whole library down to my only favorite games so that everything that the console has to offer, I know that I have on my shelf. I don't have to worry about, wanting to play a game one night and looking at a giant wall of games and just spend 40 minutes trying to figure out what I want to play and only being able to play 20 minutes because I only had an hour to spare that night. You know what I mean? So even though I've played all 1,284 games on the PS1, or I think 1,284 I think is the number, but shout out to Game Rave, Jason's in my PS1 Collectors of America groups. He helped me a lot with making sure that I've played every game on the PS1 because he has a really extensive list on that website. But the point is, I only have about 40 PS1 games, but I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything. There are times where I want to revisit a game and I might go grab something, but the point is, I only collect the games I love, and that causes me to feel like I'm never missing out because anything that I want or need out of the console, I have on my game shelf regardless of how many games are there. My next rule is that it's kind of a lot for some people. There are plenty of people who refuse to abide by this rule, and I've had conversations with friends about it before and people on my COA groups. I do not allow myself more than 5 games in my backlog per console. So if you look on my shelf, no matter what console you pull off there are not more than 5 games that I haven't beaten on that game library. Genesis is the only one that's at that number, and even then it's because a couple of the games are hard, honestly, like Gaiaris and Lightning Force, a couple other ones. Oh, Thunder Force 3 I don't think I've beaten yet. Gain Ground is pretty tough. Basically, I love shoot 'em ups, but I'm trash at them, so I haven't quite gotten to be able to beat those yet. I need to sit down for a couple weeks and just dedicate them to that one game like I did with Contra Hardcore so I can actually beat the game. But the point is, especially with modern games, I do not allow myself a big backlog. It is absolutely paralyzing, and I think a giant hindrance to a lot of people enjoying the playing aspect of the hobby when they go to pull something out and there's just too many games to choose from. So that rule is set in stone for me. I doubt that will ever change. No matter how many games are out there, no matter what the market's doing money-wise, I don't worry about that because FOMO will make you throw money at everything. I don't allow myself more than 5 games per console in the backlog. Now, this next rule is a little bit, not counterproductive, but it clashes a little bit with the concept of the earlier rules, in that while I have everything on my shelf because of playability, there is still a fun aspect to just collecting things, right? I don't want to collect everything. I don't want the coolest versions of games that I can't stand. Nintendo World Championship is the most extreme example. I don't want it. I think it's lame. It's a cool part of game history, but there's nothing playability wise for me. It's not a part of gaming history I need. I am far happier with the money that thing would provide me more than I am having the game. So I would never in a million years keep that thing. I would sell it so quick. Same with stadium events. I think the most expensive game that I would actually keep is probably Windjammers on the Neo Geo AES. Windjammers I think is one of my favorite games. I would love a complete copy of that game. That might be the most expensive game that I'd actually keep on my shelf. But the point is, aside from all that, if I'm going to do this, even though playability is the reason that I'm putting these games on my shelves, I want the games to be complete. I want the coolest version of that game because, like I said, there is an enjoyment to that side of playability. So, like, Punisher is a really good example. This is one of my favorite games in my gaming collection, whether it be because of physical collecting or just the gameplay itself. I think this is a really fun beat 'em up. This also has a little tattoo that came with it. You can see has the manual, I have the reg card, beautiful cartridge in really good shape. And then it has this little tattoo with the Punisher logo on it. And not everybody has that, not everybody knows that exists. For some people, the amount of money that can demand is kind of insane, and I totally agree. But if I'm going to do this, I want to kind of go all out with it. If I'm not going to just get everything, I want the best versions of what I do get. So things like that tattoo make physical collecting worth it. It kind of takes it up to another level as far as the enjoyment goes. So my rule, aside from playing everything that I have on my shelf that I keep, and no more than 5 games per console in my backlog, my next rule is that it has to be complete. Now, I understand that there are games that are so rare, you're going to come across things where, you have to build it gradually down the line because you're going to get a manual for a really good deal, you'll get a box for a really good deal. And some people don't want to do that because for things like the NES, the amount of money you have to pay for boxes is more than the cartridge itself sometimes, and that's just, that's absurd for some people. I totally get it, but for me, as a personal preference to get the enjoyment out of the hobby, if I'm going to collect, I'm just going to collect to the max, right? I'm going to go all out with it. If I'm going to narrow myself down that much in the playability aspect of it, then, let's have fun in the collectability side of it as well. And I think that's kind of how I accomplish that. Now, with that being said, I do have kind of a weird rule that also some people will never understand or they don't get behind. I collect every console within a nutshell, right? So I stack the games behind me here. I love collecting modern games too. I do another series on this channel called Future Proof where I play modern games and kind of see what they look like without internet, if they're the same kind of collectability as some of the vintage games. But that leads me to a lot of doubles, right? No Man's Sky, Streets of Rage 4, Hades on PS5 and Switch, Cuphead. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, to where I end up with doubles of games. And there are a lot of people who feel like double dipping just doesn't make any kind of sense, or if you get maybe the inferior version of a game, like Saturn fans are like this a lot when it comes to fighters, right? Their ports on Saturn tend to be some of the best ports out there, and most of the time they're better than PS1 ports. But it doesn't mean that the PS1 version still isn't fun to play. And if the Saturn didn't exist, would I still want it on PS1? If the answer is yes, then I still collect the game regardless of what the other consoles have to offer me. It's just a way to, I kind of enjoy, like I said, the collectability part of the hobby. It's fun to not have to count on other consoles to get everything I want out of whatever console I'm focused on, right? Like, if I wanted to play the best version of that game on Saturn, that's great. But if I end up selling my Saturn collection, or my Saturn just goes down for a time because, you know, they're old and they need repaired, I have some of the games on PS1. I'm not going to get rid of them because I have them on Saturn, or they might be a better version, or different, I should say. So for me, I do like to double dip. I collect every game within a nutshell, and it's just something that kind of helps me enjoy the collectability side of the hobby as well. Something I think is fairly decent advice that, again, feel free to tell me you disagree or agree with me in the comments. I think market value is such a complicated thing to decipher, especially nowadays with things going up and down so much. We're in a non-necessity hobby, right? This is not something that we need. It's not something that people who miss out on are going to have horrible lives if they miss out on it. It's something we do for fun because we're lucky enough to be in a society where we can focus on things like gaming and Pokemon cards. So when it comes to market value, for me, it's a little bit more of a more complicated conversation than just this is what it's worth, this is what I'm willing to pay. I think if you're going to go into the hobby, one of the better ways to enjoy it, or if you're already in it maybe, is to establish beforehand what you think the value of something is aside from the market value, right? So this tends to apply a little more to Pokemon cards, but it does apply to video games plenty. I understand that at that moment, price charting exists. eBay sold listings exist, right? You can look up the general value of an item on what other people are paying for it, and you can decide, okay, this is what I want for that game, or this is what I want to pay for that game. The problem is that stuff fluctuates so much, and we've seen over the years that it can be manipulated. We've seen auctions on eBay. We've had people straight up admit they are bidding up their auctions, right? We've seen that stuff change so much. I think it's wise to look at a game without the market value and say, okay, am I comfortable paying $20 for that game? Am I comfortable paying $50 for that game? Because realistically, if you're not going to sell the game, the resale value or market value doesn't matter at all past what you're willing to pay. If a game is worth $100 and someone says, I'll give you the game for $90, it's technically a decent deal, but if to you $90 is too much to own that game because you don't care enough about it, even though it's a good deal, you don't want to pay it, right? There's still that aspect of, do you want it, regardless of market value. Now, if you're buying to resell, this is a completely different conversation. If something is worth $500, someone offers it for $250, you buy it, you sell it, you make money. It's very easy. That makes things way easier if that's what you're doing. But if you're trying to collect and enjoy the hobby, aside from the value part of it, the monetary side of things, you need to be able to assess something's value based on your personal circumstances, not just the market value. Because sometimes people will freak out about a game because the market value is raising when realistically they didn't even want the game in the first place. There were a lot of games on PS3 specifically that shot up, like 3D Dot Game Heroes, the Puppeteer game, what was that called? There was a few. I don't know, I forget. There was a huge list of games, the Wolverine game, just a bunch of PS3 stuff a few years back that just shot up in price, and a bunch of people all of a sudden decided that they wanted games that they had never wanted before. And it's not even people who were reselling on the regular, it was just that fear of missing out. Like, oh my God, I gotta get this game before it goes any higher. when realistically, you never wanted the game when it was $20. Getting scared into throwing money at games because market value is going up, I think is really dangerous for the hobby, and for you specifically if you're in it. At least for me. I should say for me, because this is all from my perspective. I have thankfully been able to avoid the fear of missing out on stuff for so long that I'm able to stay focused on just what I want. And it's made the hobby a lot easier when you're kind of just standing on the outside looking in going, I don't know guys, maybe calm down, just focus on what you do want that hasn't gone up. You know what I mean? Because maybe that'll come back down. You never know. The market fluctuates so much over the years. If you're new to the hobby, maybe you don't understand how much it goes up and down, or if you're a seller, you know, you need to jump on while it's hot. Totally get that. But if you're someone who's just in it, kind of like where I am now in the hobby, I think assessing what you value something at without market value being part of that equation is super important. And it also helps you to be patient and find better deals. There are some Pokemon cards recently that they were valued at, you know, 60 to 100 bucks, and I just didn't feel like they were worth that. I know that's a wide range, but it is like that based on condition, right? And so I'm sitting there going like, I don't want to pay that. I'm going to send some deals to some people. So you send a deal here, you send a deal there, you wait 3 weeks, it goes up a little more, you're like, maybe I should have grabbed it. And then the following week you find one for the right deal and you pay exactly what you felt you wanted to pay in the first place, right? So assessing that value aside from the market value, while you can get burned by it, I'm not even going to lie, sometimes something can go way up and you're just like, crap, I should have grabbed that a long time ago. There are plenty of times where you're going to find good deals and you're not going to regret patience. You know, you're not going to regret jumping into hype. You're going to focus on what you enjoy. You're going to get stuff for good deals and just be happy with that part of the hobby. So I think it's good advice. Whether or not it applies to your circumstance, that's kind of another story. Now, how I actually go about collecting video games and prioritizing, this is something I've done for years. Even when I was just collecting exclusively PS1 games, it was nothing else. I made a top 100 list at all times, and I had it physically on me, where I would cross it off, and once I got over 50% crossed off, I would prioritize, right? I would compress the list and make a new 50 games below it. This translated later down the road when I started collecting more than PS1, right? I was using other consoles just to sell and then add to my PS1 collection. And eventually, you know, you're done. Once you play everything and have everything you want on PS1, you can focus on other things. So I kind of like that idea as well. But the point is, I think it doesn't hurt to make a list. Make a physical list, man. Whether it be on a spreadsheet, whether you make a physical one and print it out, prioritize what you're looking for. Because if you are limited on money, if you're not super monetarily successful and you can just get whatever you want, a lot of times you have a budget. A lot of times you have a community of places that you go and you're looking for certain things, right? It's very easy to get sidetracked and spend money on something you didn't really want, and then next week you run into that one thing that was like number one on your list, and now you're overspending because you had something you didn't want that you just bit the bullet on because that's all you could find at the time, right? So I guess a lot of it comes down to patience, and when I made a list, it was a lot easier to be patient. I would be able to prioritize whether it was accessories, consoles, games, whatever, you know, just whatever it is in the hobby that related to it that I wanted. I would make a list, and then I would take a decent amount of time actually sitting at my computer, maybe Googling gameplay or YouTubing gameplay or whatever, and trying to figure out, all right, what's the one thing that I want the most? Let's put it here, whether it be because it's expensive or I think it's going to go up. I'm like, maybe I should prioritize this because it could go up later, so I'll put it at this part of the list, right? Bottom line is, if you make a list, I think it's super handy just to prioritize yourself and really stay focused. Like, I love focusing on one console specifically. That's what I did with my PS1 collection. That's what I did with Genesis. I've now played every Genesis game, and I have my full Genesis collection, so I don't have to look back through the library that often, maybe to revisit a game or two, but I know what's there now. And when you're starting out in the hobby, or when you're kind of fresh into it, or at least got into it haphazard, you don't know what you don't know. There is so much out there, man, and you're always learning and always, you know, taking information from people who are more knowledgeable than you, or just learning hard lessons sometimes on your own, you know? So I loved staying focused. PS2 is one of my focus this year, and the Switch. Those are kind of what I'm bouncing between modern and vintage. And I love making lists and prioritizing what I want most. And it leaves me with a sense of never feeling almost ever kind of any regret, right? Anytime I spend money, I know it's from my list. I know it's something that I've thoroughly looked through and prioritized, and I can say, yeah, I spent this money. And then if I assess the market kind of on the value of what I think it's worth, if those two things work together, man, it's a recipe to never be disappointed and never be frustrated with the amount of money you're spending or regret purchases, right? So yeah, I just thought it would be fun to kind of share my perspective on how I approach video game collecting. Feel free to let me know below how you do it, you know? It's my perspective is mine. It's my story. It's where I've come all these years through video game collecting and all the people I've met, the things I've learned, and it just works for me, right? It doesn't always work for everybody because everyone has different circumstances, but I've definitely had people say, hey, I appreciate, you know, how methodical you are in doing what you do, and I kind of adopted that same thing. And of course, people change it up a little bit because that's what people do. That's what we all do. But I thought it'd be fun to at least share with you kind of my perspective on how I approach video game collecting in 2025. So feel free to check out some other content on the channel, guys. I'm going to do some more topical videos on different things, whether it be Pokemon or video games. So just keep an eye out for more stuff on the channel. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I will see you guys later.